Undercover CEO works as a cashier, horrified by how seniors are treated in his own store. Ethan Caldwell sat in his car, gripping the steering wheel as he stared at the grocery store in front of him. His grocery chain, Freshway Markets, had started as a single store. Now, it had 12 locations, hundreds of employees, and a loyal customer base, or at least, that's what he had believed. But over the last few months, complaints had been piling up. Customers reported rude employees, long wait times, and worst of all, mistreatment of elderly shoppers. Ethan had read the reports, listened to his managers assure him everything was under control, but something felt off. Numbers on a spreadsheet couldn't tell him the full truth. So, he had made a decision. He needed to see it for himself. Gone was his usual tailored suit and polished shoes. Instead, he wore a plain polo, khakis, and thick-rimmed glasses. He had grown out his beard, trimmed it to rough stubble, and even added a cheap wristwatch to complete the look. His name tag, hastily pinned to his chest, read, Eric. Taking a deep breath, he grabbed his employee folder and stepped out of his car. The automatic doors slid open with a mechanical whir, welcoming him into a store that felt different than his usual corporate offices. There was a staleness in the air, a tension that wasn't visible but could be felt. Employees moved quickly, heads down, avoiding unnecessary conversation. He approached the customer service desk, where a young woman with tired eyes barely looked up from her computer screen. Hi, Ethan said, clearing his throat. I'm supposed to start today, training as a cashier. The woman blinked, then checked a clipboard. Right, you're Eric. She nodded toward the back. Lisa will train you, follow me. Ethan followed her toward the registers, where a petite woman in her early 30s stood adjusting a pricing scanner. Her dark brown hair was pulled into a messy ponytail, strands falling out around her face. Her name tag read, Lisa, Assistant. Manager! She looked up, offering a polite but tired smile. You must be Eric. Ethan nodded. Yep. First day, Lisa exhaled, gesturing toward the register. All right, I'll keep this quick. Customers hate waiting. She moved efficiently, pressing buttons on the screen. Scan, bag, take payment. If the registers freeze, just breathe through it. Happens more often than corporate wants to admit. Ethan absorbed the information, watching her hands move expertly over the buttons. Then, after a brief hesitation, she added, And if you hear Rick say anything, just ignore him. Ethan frowned. Rick? Before Lisa could answer, a sharp voice cut through the air. Move faster, will you? These carts aren't going to unload themselves. Ethan turned toward the sound and saw a stocky man with a permanent scowl standing near the back stockroom. His arms were crossed as he glared at a younger employee struggling to stack heavy produce crates. Pick it up, kid. You're slower than my grandma, the man sneered. The teenager mumbled an apology and hurried to finish. Lisa sighed under her breath. That's Rick. Ethan kept his expression neutral. So, this was the supervisor, the one in charge of the store's daily operations. Rick turned, scanning the floor like a predator searching for weakness. His eyes landed on Ethan. You the new guy? Ethan nodded. Yeah, Eric. Rick gave a half smirk. Well, Eric, let's see if you last longer than the last one. Ethan raised an eyebrow. The last one? Lisa quickly jumped in. Let's not scare him off on his first day, Rick scoffed, grabbing a clipboard off the counter. I don't scare anyone. If people can't handle a little pressure, that's on them. He gave Ethan a once-over. Just don't be an idiot at the register, and we won't have a problem. Ethan clenched his jaw but forced a polite nod. Lisa gave him an apologetic look before nudging him toward the register. All right, let's get started. Ethan took his position behind the counter, rolling his shoulders. He was here to observe, to understand, and already, something felt very, very wrong. Ethan had only been on the register for an hour, but he could already feel the weight of the store's atmosphere pressing down on him. The employees weren't lazy. If anything, they moved too quickly, their eyes constantly darting toward the stockroom door as if expecting trouble. And trouble came soon enough. A frail elderly woman shuffled to Ethan's register, placing a small basket of groceries on the conveyor belt. She moved carefully, her fingers trembling slightly as she pulled out her coin purse. "Take your time, ma'am," Ethan said kindly, scanning her items. Behind him, he heard a loud, exaggerated sigh. "Here we go again," a voice muttered. Ethan turned slightly. Rick, arms crossed, standing a few feet behind the register. The elderly woman, clearly hearing him, hesitated, her hands shaking as she fumbled with her change. I just need a moment," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Rick scoffed. "Every damn time. They count their pennies, ask dumb questions, and then hold up the line." He smirked. "I swear they should have their own damn store." Ethan's grip on the register tightened. The woman's face turned red as she finally handed him the correct amount. She tried to smile, but her embarrassment was clear. "I'm sorry," she said softly. Ethan gently placed her groceries into a bag and handed it to her. "No rush at all, ma'am," he said warmly. She nodded gratefully and shuffled away, keeping her eyes down. Rick shook his head, laughing under his breath. "Unbelievable." Ethan turned to him, his jaw clenched. "Everything okay?" Rick smirked. "You'll learn, new guy. Seniors waste time. They don't spend enough to make up for it, and they slow everyone else down." Lisa, who had been nearby stocking shelves, froze mid-motion. Her eyes flicked to Ethan, watching, waiting. Ethan wanted to say something, to tell Rick exactly what he thought. But he wasn't just here to react. He was here to see the full picture. So he forced a neutral expression and turned back to his register. But his blood was boiling. During lunch break, Ethan sat at a small plastic table in the cramped employee lounge, pretending to scroll through his phone. He listened. "I can't keep doing this," one cashier muttered. "Rick cut my hours again." "Yeah," another whispered back. Meanwhile, his favorites get full shifts. Lisa sat across the room, staring at her coffee cup. Her exhaustion was impossible to miss. Then, a stock clerk lowered his voice. "Did you hear what Rick said to Mrs. Thompson earlier? She's been shopping here for years, and he told her she should just order online instead of wasting space." Ethan's stomach twisted. "I'd quit if I could," the first cashier said bitterly. "But everywhere else is just as bad." At that moment, Rick walked in. The conversation died instantly. Employees stiffened. Some picked up their phones. Others stared at their food, acting like nothing had happened. Rick grinned. "Why so quiet?" He grabbed a soda from the fridge, then turned to Lisa. "By the way, I need you to cover tomorrow morning." "Greg's out," Lisa blinked. "But I already opened today, and I'm scheduled to close." Rick shrugged. "Not my problem. Figure it out." And just like that, he walked out. Lisa exhaled slowly, staring down at the table. Ethan had seen enough. This wasn't just bad management. This was a toxic workplace. And tomorrow, he wasn't just going to observe, he was going to take action. Ethan arrived at the store the next morning, but this time, he wasn't just another cashier. Today, he was the CEO. As he walked through the automatic doors, he noticed how different the store felt now that he knew the truth. The nervous glances, the hushed voices, the way employees tensed whenever Rick was near. He had seen it all before, but now it felt magnified. Rick was already on the floor, barking orders at a young stock clerk who was scrambling to rearrange a shelf. Lisa stood behind the register, exhaustion clear on her face. Ethan took a deep breath. Time to end this. He didn't hesitate. He walked straight toward Rick's office, pushed open the door without knocking, and shut it behind him. Rick looked up, frowning. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Ethan removed his glasses. Then, he unpinned his name tag and set it on Rick's desk. Rick's frown deepened. "What's this?" Ethan met his eyes. I'm Ethan Caldwell. A silence stretched between them. Rick's face paled. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. Ethan stepped forward, his voice low but firm. I own this company. Rick blinked rapidly, like he was trying to process what had just happened. He glanced at the door, as if contemplating an escape, then forced out a chuckle. You're kidding. Ethan didn't smile. I've spent the last 2 days working in this store, watching, listening, and I have to say, I'm disgusted. Rick swallowed. Sir, Save it, Ethan cut him off. He leaned forward, pressing his palms against the desk. I heard how you talk about our customers. I saw how you treat your employees. You mock elderly shoppers, cut hours for workers you don't like, and force Lisa to run this store while you do next to nothing. You have no respect for the people keeping this place alive. Rick finally found his voice, sitting up straighter. With all due respect, Mr. Caldwell, you don't understand how hard it is to run a store like this. Ethan's jaw clenched. Oh, I understand perfectly. Rick scoffed. Look, these employees should be grateful they have jobs. If they can't handle it, they can leave. Simple as that. Ethan's grip on the desk tightened. He exhaled slowly, then straightened up. You think this is about power, he said, his voice eerily calm. But it's not. It's about respect. Rick opened his mouth again, but Ethan didn't let him speak. And I will not have someone like you running one of my stores. Rick's confidence wavered. You can't just fire me. Ethan held his gaze. Yes, I can. And I just did. A tense silence filled the office. Rick stood up abruptly, knocking his chair back. His face flushed red with anger. This is ridiculous. Good luck running this place without me. You'll see how fast things fall apart. Ethan stepped aside and gestured to the door. We'll take our chances. Rick glared at him for a long moment, then grabbed his coat. Muttering under his breath, he stormed out of the office. Ethan followed him into the store. Employees looked up in confusion as Rick stomped toward the exit. Some glanced at Ethan, their faces uncertain. Lisa froze behind the register, her hands gripping the counter. At the door, Rick turned one last time. His lip curled into a sneer. You'll regret this. And then he was gone. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then Ethan turned to the employees. I know this is a shock, he said, his voice carrying across the store. But let me be clear. This store is not a mess. You all have been doing your jobs under terrible leadership. That changes today. The employees exchanged uncertain glances. Some looked relieved, others wary. Lisa finally found her voice. Wait, who are you? Ethan turned to her. I'm Ethan Caldwell. A few employees gasped softly. A cashier covered her mouth in shock. Ethan continued, looking directly at Lisa. And I've been working here undercover to see what's really going on. Lisa's eyes widened. You were the new guy. Ethan nodded. And I saw everything. How you held this place together. How Rick treated you. How customers were ignored or mistreated. That ends now. A stock clerk hesitantly raised his hand. So, things are actually going to change? Ethan met his gaze. Yes, immediately. Then he turned back to Lisa. I need to talk to you in the office. Lisa tensed. For a moment, she looked like she was bracing herself for bad news. Then slowly, she nodded and followed him inside. Lisa sat down, still looking stunned. Ethan sat across from her, clasping his hands together. I've seen how hard you work, he said. Lisa let out a breath, shaking her head. I just do what I have to. Ethan leaned forward slightly. No, Lisa. You've been running this store without recognition. That changes today. She looked up, confused. Ethan smiled slightly. I want you to take over as interim store manager. Lisa blinked. Me? You're the only person here who actually cares about this place, Ethan said, and I trust you to rebuild what Rick broke. Lisa's hands trembled slightly. I don't know if I can. Ethan met her eyes. You already have been. You just didn't have the authority to do it. She swallowed hard. Then, after a moment, she slowly nodded. Ethan smiled. Good. Because starting today, we're fixing this store. The store felt different. For the first time since Ethan had stepped through those automatic doors as Eric, the air was lighter. The employees weren't rushing around with nervous glances over their shoulders. The tense silence that usually filled the break room was replaced with whispers of disbelief and cautious hope. Rick was gone. Ethan stood outside the manager's office, hands resting on his hips as he watched Lisa take slow, measured breaths from her chair inside. She still looked shocked. "I'm the new store manager," Lisa muttered under her breath, still trying to process what had happened in the last hour. "Yes." Ethan gave her a small but firm nod. Effective immediately. Lisa ran a hand through her messy ponytail. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Ethan said. "You just have to lead." Lisa let out a dry laugh. "Lead? I've spent the last 2 years barely keeping this place from falling apart while Rick sat in this office doing nothing." She gestured around the room. "I don't even know if I can—" Ethan cut her off gently. "Lisa, you already have." She stared at him. "This store didn't collapse under Rick because of you." Ethan leaned forward. "You kept this place running. The employees trust you. They come to you with their problems because they know you'll actually listen. You didn't have power before, but you do now." Lisa swallowed hard. I just don't want to fail." Ethan nodded slowly. "Then don't." Lisa blinked. "You're going to make mistakes," he continued. "But you care about this store and the people in it. That's the difference between you and Rick." Lisa exhaled slowly. Then she sat up straighter. The uncertainty in her eyes hadn't fully disappeared, but there was something new. Determination. "All right," she said. "I'll do it." Ethan smiled. "Good. Now let's go fix this store." Lisa stood, adjusting her name tag. Her hands were still shaking slightly, but when she looked at Ethan, her gaze was steady. They stepped out of the office together, and the real work began. Ethan and Lisa stood at the front of the store. Every employee, cashiers, stock clerks, deli workers, was gathered, uncertain, but listening. "I know this has been a crazy morning," Ethan started, "but I need you all to hear me loud and clear. This store is not a failure." A few employees exchanged wary glances. "You all have been working under terrible leadership, but that changes now." Ethan turned to Lisa, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Lisa is your new store manager." Lisa visibly tensed as employees gasped in surprise. A young stock clerk, Noah, spoke up. "Wait, really?" Ethan nodded. "Yes, and I need every single one of you to help her make this place better. That means changes, real ones." He glanced around the room, making eye contact with each employee. "Schedules will be fair. No more favoritism. No more punishing employees just because they don't laugh at the boss's jokes." A few employees chuckled under their breath. "Breaks will be enforced. You are not machines, you are people, and people need rest." Lisa nodded in agreement. "No more skipping lunches just to keep up." Ethan's voice hardened. "And most importantly, respect is not optional. No more berating customers. No more humiliating employees. I won't tolerate it." The employees stood in stunned silence. Some of them looked skeptical. They had heard empty promises before. A cashier, Maya, raised her hand. "But what happens when corporate stops caring again? When another Rick shows up?" Ethan met her eyes. "Then I expect you to hold me accountable," he said simply. Maya's expression softened, and for the first time, a small glimmer of hope appeared in her eyes. Another voice spoke up, this time from the back of the group. "Excuse me, Mr. Caldwell." Ethan turned. An elderly woman stood near the entrance, clutching a small purse. It was the same woman Rick had humiliated the day before. The room fell silent. "Ma'am," Ethan greeted her gently. "Welcome back." The woman gave a small, hesitant smile. "I just wanted to say thank you." Ethan's chest tightened. Lisa stepped forward, her voice firm but warm. "We'll take good care of you today, ma'am. Take all the time you need." The woman beamed, and in that moment, something shifted in the store. Employees stood up straighter. The weight on their shoulders seemed just a little lighter. For the first time in a long time, this place felt like a real team. And Ethan knew he had done the right thing. Weeks later, Ethan returned to the store unannounced. He wasn't wearing his disguise anymore. No glasses, no fake name tag. He was just Ethan, and what he saw nearly brought a smile to his face. The store was alive. Employees worked without fear. They greeted customers warmly instead of avoiding eye contact. The shelves were better stocked, the lines moved efficiently, and, most importantly, Lisa was leading. She stood at the front of the store, adjusting schedules and checking in with cashiers. Ethan watched as she approached Noah, the stock clerk. "You doing all right today?" Lisa asked. Noah grinned. "Yeah. Actually, I am." Lisa smiled, nodding. "Good." Then, from the register, a familiar voice spoke up. "Take your time, ma'am." Ethan turned. Maya, the cashier, was helping an elderly woman count her change, and, this time, no one was rushing her. Ethan exhaled slowly, his chest feeling lighter. For the first time in a long time, he knew. This was the company he had always meant to build, and this time he would make sure it stayed that way.